Welcome to Becoming Spiritual, a podcast about the magic that surrounds us and has always been a part of us. I'm your host, Heather Dolan, a passionate seeker dedicated to bringing together beautiful humans who are doing amazing things in this world. Together, we will explore healing modalities and practical spiritual practices that can enrich your everyday life. We will also hear stories of awakenings, many from people in the corporate world who have broken out of the spiritual closet. Wherever you are in your journey, know you have found a community of open-hearted individuals committed to making themselves and our world a better place. Welcome home. Hello, and welcome back to the Becoming Spiritual podcast. I'm your host, Heather, and I am really excited to introduce you to a friend of mine who is here. She is acting as both a producer as well as my spiritual sidekick. So welcome, Natalie Grace.
Hello, Heather, and hello, listeners.
So I am so excited to have Natalie be a part of this. So as I mentioned, she is not only producing the podcast for me, thank goodness, because I know how to do none of this, but she is also one of my favorite people to talk all things spiritual with. Just a couple of fun facts. Natalie is in Australia, so most of our conversations are actually via voice messaging back and forth through Telegram. But we have formed a pretty tight bond, and we'll share a little bit about our relationship and kind of how we both got here. So I would love for you to just share a little bit with the listeners about you, who you are, and kind of your everyday life. And we'll dive into some different points of your journey, how you and I connected. And let's start there.
Thanks, Heather. So I wear lots of hats in my life. I am an energy medicine maker. I work with the modality of flower remedies using the Batch Flower Remedy System, and that is one of my most important parts of service. I am also deeply in love with the tarot, and I know we're going to talk about that a lot in future, but I work with the tarot as a tarot reader, but more importantly, a tarot teacher. And the tarot itself is my greatest teacher and has taught me so much about the world and about reality and about spirituality as well. And it's kind of been a gateway to a bigger stage of awakening for me in my life. And I think that's part of what led us together to meet and to share and to connect in the way we have. And in addition to that, what else is a big part of my life? I love animals. I have a beautiful kitty bred who's my spiritual offsider as well. He's my little soulmate in cat form. I also have my own podcast, although it's kind of on hiatus at the moment. It's called The Initiates, and that's another cool reason we've connected more recently, because I've been on the podcasting journey for a couple of years, and it's such an incredible way to connect and share ideas and build community, which is something that I'm really excited to hear you talk about as well with what you're going to be building here. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Thank you. And yes, as Natalie mentioned, one of the first episodes we'll be rolling out is on tarot, because it's such a beautiful practice. It is an amazing modality. I've gotten to experience it through Natalie a couple of times now, which we'll be talking about. And so I can't wait for her to share kind of all those things, because if you're like me, where the tarot was actually really intimidating, Natalie just makes it so easy to understand. And it actually gets me excited thinking about tarot now, where I used to be really intimidated and just think, all these cards, all these symbols, just, it was too much for me. So she breaks it down beautifully, and we'll definitely go into that on another episode. In addition to, hopefully we'll even talk about flower remedies, because you introduced me to those as well. And I have used them in my own life. I've used them with my kids. So such another beautiful form of medicine that Mother Earth provides to us. So would love for us to talk about that, but not today. So Natalie is one of my teachers from the podcast world, because she's a great podcast. I know she's going to bring it back online soon after a good couple of seasons that she had there. But we actually met through another podcast, the Soul Tribe podcast. And the beautiful thing that podcast did was it brought a lot of us together during the pandemic. It started out as a podcast, and then they set up a community through Telegram. And so it was just a really just amazing, soulful place to come. And when I joined, and Natalie, you can share a little bit about how you kind of came to the group. But when I joined, it was probably 2022, if I'm thinking back from a time perspective, and I was on the spiritual journey, was going through my awakening process, and there were so many different everyday people who were also kind of going through this discovery, learning about different modalities. People would share what they do, what they were working on, what they were reading. And it just was such a beautiful way to connect with people, especially when we really couldn't connect with each other in person. So we were able to do so through this group. And I know for me, it was a bit of a lifeline because I was going through this awakening process and trying to learn. I was just inhaling knowledge from anywhere I could get it. And I really didn't have too many people to talk to about it. And so this community was that place. It was safe. And because the podcast delved into so much around the two sisters, Lucia and Lorena. Hi, I hope you're listening to this, ladies. They really are just experts in the Akashic records. And I knew nothing about it. I had to Google it. And then I found their podcast. Someone had actually recommended it to me. And I listened to a bunch of episodes, and then I was hooked. And, I think I kind of like how people binge series. I was binging podcast episodes. And so I learned so much, and I would ask this group anything. It was a safe space. No questions were dumb. No one made you feel like you should know something. And so it was such a beautiful place. And that's where Natalie and I first met. And it was really fun to be able to connect with her and other members. It's really a global community. It's not US centric, which is nice. So we got lots of different perspectives, and it was fun to kind of hear everyone's journey. So tell me a little bit about how you came to find the ladies.
Yeah. So I had to think about this and track back. At that time, I wasn't new to spirituality or the spiritual path, but I was definitely in a process of deepening and rediscovery, I want to say, because that was such a powerful time. And I think a lot of incredible connections and knowledge was shared over the internet and over digital or virtual networks, especially around beliefs and spirituality. And at that time, I was also just soaking up as much information and knowledge from different perspectives as I could. And I came across Golden V's podcast, who had Lorena and Lucia on as guests on her podcast, I think. So that's how I got exposed to those guys, and I followed the chain, and that led me to the Soul Tribe podcast. And pretty quickly I was like, oh, I love the way these two sisters talk about these big issues with this spiritual lens. And Akashic Records, if you're not familiar with it, is a form of channeling from a higher source of wisdom, I guess we could say. And another topic I'm sure we're going to go into in the future. But hearing them take stuff that was happening in our 3D world and then seek higher guidance and share that with the community was so powerful and so needed at that time. And it was pretty quickly that I was like, oh, this is a community I want to be a part of. And I joined their Patreon where the community lives, and so many incredible souls. I feel like we all signed some form of soul contract before we came down to all connect somehow. And they just happened to set up this beautiful ecosystem of connection where we all found each other and were able to provide so much wisdom and support and perspective during a really crucial and life-changing time universally on the planet.
For sure. It was special. For sure. And I'm so incredibly grateful. And as we know, some communities come into our lives for certain amounts of time and to help us learn or grow or expand. And I can, say with certainty that community did that for me. And it's now, if I think of kind of the spider web of what that created, of all of the connections and how I've been able to weave that into my life and bring other people together because of kind of that group. It's just, it's not that I want to go back to pandemic times, but there were some fond memories from then. So
yeah. And that was really good medicine for those times as well.
It was agreed. So as you mentioned, when we were just chatting, for me, I think we all, if we look back at our journeys in our lives, we can see where there were either choice points or really important moments where of course, spirituality in some way or another, we might not have seen it that way, but it entered our life in some way, in a more, I guess, prominent way. So for you, why don't you share a little bit about your story and how, because you're unlike me, and I'm going to share this with listeners because I know for me, sometimes I have found myself intimidated a bit when I hear people talk about their stories and they knew at a young age, 3, 4, 5, they could see colors, they could see spirits, they could hear things. It's like they had these gifts, and a lot of people or children shut them down because they're scared. And for me, that's not my story. That's not part of my story, which I reference a little bit in the first episode. So while there were definitely points in my life that I could point to as divinely guided, and our whole lives are divinely guided, but where there was more spirituality, I would say, present in my life in different ways and different modalities through different healers that I met, I definitely didn't have kind of that spiritual lens. And so your story is different, but I think for people listening, it is important to say, if this isn't your story, and maybe this is the first time you're experiencing being exposed to more spiritual concepts, that's okay. And chances are, like me, you'll look back at some point and realize that there were probably other times where you were more spiritual, but was not tuning into, your guidance in a way. I think that was more prevalent for you. So anyway, just to kind of set the stage there. So Natalie is one of those beautiful souls who was probably a bit more connected at a younger age. And so I would love for you to share a little bit about that.
Yeah, I was one of those kids. I could hear stuff from as early as I remember, and just had extrasensory things that was a normal part of my day-to-day life that took me probably until my mid-20s to discover that other people didn't have that experience.
And interesting.
Yeah.
Wait, I'm just curious. So would you ever say to someone when you were little or a teenager, like, did you hear that? Or like look around, like almost like someone was speaking to you? Because I do know is something that really clicked for me when I was reading not to take us off track, but when I was reading a medium, it's called the Medium Mentor book. And when she was talking about hearing spirit or hearing divine guidance, I always thought that it was going to be like this booming voice in my head, that it was different from my own voice. And when I came to the chapter, which was probably halfway through the book, maybe 3/4, where she said, it is in your own voice. It is not a separate voice. It clicked, and it was like that aha moment. And I was like, okay, that's what I was supposed to get from this book. And so I say that of, I guess tongue in cheek, looking around like someone just whispered in your ear. But I do know there are some people who do have it, where they're channeling specific guidance, where I think it is maybe a different voice, but I don't know. So I'm just curious.
Yeah, it's a super interesting question. And that is so true, because when we're reconnecting with our higher wisdom, it's always going to be in our voice. What I was hearing wasn't my voice. So I think it can get a bit complex. So we'll probably save that for when we're going deep into
now I'm intrigued. Okay. I guess we haven't talked about this.
Yeah, the clair senses can be quite complex if you haven't heard about them before. But with my experience as a kid, I had two things that would happen to me. I had a very clear sense of, I want to say, like predicting the future, which I guess now I've never thought about it, but that's led me into like working as essentially an oracle. I wouldn't say channeling, but tapping into a future field, future information. So that was one part. So the knowing that I had was definitely not from outside of me. It was from inside of me. And I thought that everyone had that knowing, that everyone was supposed to know what was coming. And it would shock me constantly that I would know things, or just know sounds like it's a mental thing, but it's actually not. It was just an understanding of what was to come in a way that the adults around me didn't. They would be shocked and surprised when things would happen.
And what age was that?
Oh,
what would you say?
I remember from like 6, 7, 8.
Wow.
It was just innate in me. So that was something that was from within and wasn't some external voice telling me what was happening, although some people might have that. But for my hearing stuff, that is what we call clairaudience, which I learned much later. that was outside of myself. And I think this is probably where people who are say they're hearing things or receiving messages from spirits or something like that, that will probably sound like a different voice, I'd imagine. I don't really have that experience. What I would experience was it wouldn't happen all the time in like the waking hours in the day-to-day while I was at school or anything like that. It would be in the time between awake and asleep when we are kind of transitioning from the conscious to the subconscious, as I understand it now. We're in this receptive zone, and I was very receptive when I was a kid. And so what it sounded like to me was sometimes I would hear actual voices and words. It wasn't like something I got really scared about when I hit my 20s and I started to understand concepts like schizophrenia. I was like, if I told anyone this, they would think I'm crazy and they would try to medicate me. So it's something that I never spoke about until very recently in life. No voices were telling me to do anything. No voices were telling me to take action, and no voices were saying anything negative. What it sounded like to me was it was like a radio was in the background, half tuned to a station. So it was kind of faint and away, but I could hear it, and I could hear conversations happening that weren't in my reality, my physical reality. So it was like I was tuned to a different frequency, and I could pick up on that in that state between awake and asleep.
Interesting. So then that sounds like you could hear multiple voices because it was like you were almost like a voyeur to a conversation.
Yeah, and I could never quite understand the full conversation. This is the thing. So it was like, it makes so much sense to me now because I do believe in all different frequencies, you know, and science will tell us that our ears and our eyes can only see a particular and hear a particular spectrum of frequency, and that dogs and cats can hear frequencies that we can't hear. And there are colors that exist that we can't see with our human eyes, and light frequencies and stuff like that. So
this is why Natalie's my spiritual sidekick, by the way, because she knows something about everything.
Yeah.
She's like an encyclopedia. Okay, keep going.
It's also called ADHD, but anyway, I've always been a bit of a jack of all trades and all information. So yeah, jack of all trades, but no true master of any one thing. Hopefully tarot one day.
Disagree, but that's okay.
No, I'm a constant student.
Yeah. So you're tuned to these frequencies. You could never really hear what they were saying. So is it like the Peanuts cartoon? Do you have the Peanuts in Australia?
Yeah.
Okay, like where the teacher's like, wah, 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 wah.
No, it was like, that's the best way I can describe it. If you're trying to pick up a radio station and you're a bit out of range from where the station transmits and you're trying to pick it up, but it's like half sort of static and half there, you can hear both things happening at the same time, but you can't quite pick up with clarity on what actually is being said. So it was almost like I was tuned into another reality where people were just living and I could hear what was happening, but it wasn't informing my day-to-day life, if that makes sense. It's just a normal thing that I would experience every time I went to sleep. I really don't hear much anymore, I have to be honest, and I think it's because I just live in a more constant state of openness and contemplation and things like that, where I can just receive guidance within myself and hear my own voice speak that to me. So going back to when I was a kid, I could hear a lot of stuff that was outside of the physical reality, and I couldn't quite understand it and I didn't know what was happening, but I also didn't think I was special and had some special skill or talent. I thought everyone could hear stuff when they went to sleep, and sometimes that would be clearer than other times, but it was very consistent. And I was also really interested in stuff when I was a kid, like astrology. I started really getting interested in reading horoscopes that were in the newspaper at the time. You know, there was no internet back then, guys. Something happened when I was 8 years old that I won't go into now, but it really shook me because I went to a Catholic school and there was like this contrast of what I was being taught at school about what's good and what's evil, and then playing around with what I didn't understand at the time, but were mystical ideas or mystical tools that I guess you'd call blasphemous. So internally, it was confusing for me. And then I had an accident when I was 8, which really shook things up and made me scared to play in that space. And I sort of shut down my interests in the spirituality at that time, in astrology, in that kind of otherworldly stuff. And I just focused on being a good girl and a good student. But I still had these voices. I still heard stuff when I was going to sleep. And then it got to my 20s. And this was still continuing, but it wasn't until my like late 20s, early 30s when it actually started becoming useful, not just something that was happening in the background. So I'd be in this state between asleep and awake, sometimes even fully asleep, and I would be woken up with words in my head that I've heard someone speak to me and a compulsion to write it down because I knew it would be important. That was a really cool thing that was happening to me for a while. And a lot of those words I still have, and I know they're like clues to lead me somewhere to investigate something, but they're still
like, can you share like what's an example?
Yeah, like one time I woke up and I had the words alliance transmutation said to me. It's not stuff that you would be thinking about or dreaming about, you know, or people say in normal life. Like it's quite abstract. It's very simple. It seems like a terminology. And I wrote it down. Sometimes I wake up and I want to write it down and it just leaves like very quickly. But that one was very sharp and very short and I was able to capture it. And so that still sits with me. And I've kind of come to the point where I realize at first I was trying to seek out the people working on alliance transmutation, whatever that means. But now I've realized that's what I'm a part of. You know, I'm work with the collective energy, with the tarot work I do to help us empower ourselves and awaken. And so I guess I'm working in the field of alliance transmutation. That's what you and I are probably going to be doing through working together on this podcast.
Okay, cool.
So look, that's kind of complicated, but yeah. So getting back to the words, when I was in my 30s, I was having such a hard time at work. I loved the work, but I just didn't feel at home and at peace in the place that I was working. I had a boss at the time who I wasn't sure about, and some stuff was happening in the organization. There were restructures happening and I was having all these meetings and I really wanted to leave, and I'd already announced I was going to leave. And I had people from left, right and center trying to convince me to stay, and I didn't trust it. And I was so confused about what to do because I was trying to follow my soul's calling to kind of like do what makes you happy. That place doesn't make you happy, you know. And I was having a nap and I was woken up from my nap with someone in my ear saying, "Don't trust," and then your boss's name, like loud and clear. And I was like, well, that's it.
Wow.
I know what to do. It's about them and not about me. So anyway.
So was that one of the first times that you actually got, I don't want to say something useful, because I'm sure if you look back, there's probably some useful bits in there.
Yeah.
But was that the first time it was really direct?
Yeah. And I think useful, like action-based, yes. Like something direct and not abstract, yes, probably. There might have been other times that I can't remember, but that one from later in life, because it stopped happening. So yeah, later in life, that came through much more clearly and it was profound. And I remember telling some of my friends about this who weren't spiritual, and this is such a hard thing when you want to share with people and want their advice, but you experience stuff that isn't really accepted by lots of other people that they don't understand, and they're not trying to be mean, but I immediately was just told, well, isn't that you just thinking? And I was like,
yeah,
I know what my thoughts are. I know what my thoughts sound like, but no, it's actually not. It was something different. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think a lot of people can probably relate to not only not having someone to go to for these types of things when they happen, but I think there's probably a lot of people who have had some kind of experience and thought maybe it was just their mind on overdrive, or, you know, probably not what they would call a spiritual experience, because especially if you're not really aware of these types of things happening and that they happen to other people. So now you are. But I do think also people probably put things out there when they want answers to things. I know personally people that are close to me that are looking for guidance, and they think the answer is going to come in a yes, no, or you should do this, or don't do that, or you need to, you know, make this change. You need to quit your job or something. This is a really perfect example of that, where they're not saying quit the job, but it's don't trust this person giving you information, because in the end you have free will. So you can make that decision as to if you were going to stay or go. I know you said you already had decided to go, but I do think that's a really important point to just kind of stop on for a second. I just want to make sure I kind of share that because, again, I think a lot of people feel they're not sure, especially if you're new to potentially getting messages or things coming through, thinking that there's a certain way that they're going to come in or that you're going to get answers that are black and white. And it just doesn't work that way, as we know.
Yeah. And this kind of stuff will often happen when you are already getting the guidance, getting the messages, but you're not listening, or you're suppressing it, or you're ignoring it, or it's easier not to make the hard decision. We have a really incredible superpower called our intuition that we often shut down because we don't trust ourselves, or because of outside pressures, or because we have, just the mundane reality of life that we need to keep up with, bills and responsibilities to family and all of those things. There's so many reasons, and we're taught from a very young age to suppress our intuition. And so if we're not in a space where we're able to receive or take action on our own inner guidance, the universe will start intervening in other ways. Sometimes that can be health. Sometimes that can be an accident. Sometimes that can be signs and synchronicities and symbols. And sometimes, like me, it can result in, I guess, one of my guides kind of shaking me in my sleep going, you know what to do. Don't trust what they're telling you. Just go do the right thing for you right now.
Yeah, I love that. And thank you for, kind of laying that out, because I think we know probably we're guided all the time from the time we come in here, from the time we're, really born. There's guidance, and there are guides around, there's angels around us. There's so much help coming from so many places. And yes, we're not really taught to embrace that, especially as children. And I want to kind of go back to a point that you made when you were talking about your childhood and when you were 8 and you had your accident, and talking about the religious component, because I think that's really important. And I think we're going to hear a lot of stories throughout this podcast, because I know I've heard them from a lot of people that I've spoken to, of there is this, when you have religion, which I also come from a religious background, we were Protestant, and a bit more, I would say, flexible or open than Catholicism. There wasn't as much kind of fire and brimstone and penance and, all those things. But at the same time, there was structure, and I kind of learned Christianity through the lens of the Bible and, the pastors who were preaching every week, and was very involved in my church community. And I'm incredibly grateful for that community. It was a beautiful community that was really supportive of my family. And my mom's still very involved in the church. But there can be that religious aspect where people do shut down gifts because they feel like whatever's going on, like you said, is blasphemous, or they're told by these religious organizations or these structures that all of this is bad. It's darkness, it's dark magic, it's, all of those things. So I'm just curious how that, kind of affected you in terms of your life. I mean, you did say you shut a lot of things down, but how did that play out a little bit, as you got a little bit older?
Yeah, I think even though my personal experience was quite unique, it's a common experience that so many of us go through with the upbringings we have, whether they're religious or otherwise, that we shut down our magic, and that's where we lose our connection with our intuition and our guides and just the magic of being incarnated here on the earth. It's such a beautiful, magical place, but from such a young age, we're told to be in fear and to be in distrust and to be disconnected from the natural world. So I think that's a common experience for all of us. But for me personally, it wasn't, how do I describe this? It wasn't so much the you're going to hell aspect that was scaring me because it was sinning or something like that. It was more that and this is very Catholic, there's a thing called Catholic guilt. And I even carried this on. I'd say this as a grown adult, and my atheist friends would be like, Natalie, that's not actually how the world works. But I thought I'd done something wrong and that God was punishing me through the accident I had, because the accident I had was within a church. It was an act of negligence by the people in the church. And It happened literally during the initiation of penance called the First Holy Communion. So during that initiation, literal initiation, and initiations become a huge theme for me that I've carried right through to the point of it being the name of my podcast. I'm very interested in these powerful moments of personal initiation, but that one was incredibly symbolic for me. So the fact that that happened at that very specific, highly charged, important moment of initiation for me, it was immediately like I must have done something really bad for God to punish me publicly in that way. And it triggered such a spiritual crisis in me as a child, as an 8-year-old child. Like, it's pretty wild to think about now as a fully grown adult. But it's shaped so much of my life. And there's so many good parts I took away from what I loved about my Catholic education. Obviously, I didn't like that bit, and I have really strong feelings about the hypocrisy around care and responsibility, which I think a lot of people would feel given the things we know about the Catholic Church and what they've hidden, what's come out about that in regards to their duty of care around children. But at the same time, I feel so lucky to have been able to been taught in school about concepts like love, peace, forgiveness, compassion, service, and the life of Jesus as well, because we don't have to think of Jesus being a religious figure. He can just be an ascended master, if you're not inclined to think that way. And a really good example of just a person who lives from the heart chakra, almost like a fifth dimensional being. So I love that I got to learn about that from such a young age. Didn't love so much all the other stuff about the fire and brimstone and all the rest, all the reasons you'll be sent to hell. I don't really like the concept of original sin at all. I think that's a complete subversion of the teachings of Jesus. But the other thing that I got to take with me from my experience as a child was all of the symbolic language and the artistic symbols in church, in religious artwork, just in the signs we'd have to make for all of the different religious holidays throughout the year. But yeah, basically that was my initiation into working with the tarot. And going back to what you said before about like feeling out of place when we hear of these people who've been on these journeys for decades, these spiritual journeys, and they had their awakening at such a young age. Like I said, I suppressed mine until probably early 30s. I started to get back into being interested in the magic of the unseen and also the science of it and the philosophy of it, all layers. And I, compared with other people, I've been working with tarot for quite a while now, but more recently, in my life, and I felt out of place with so many people who are tarot readers, have been working with tarot since they were children, and they got gifted a deck by an auntie and all of the like folklore that didn't belong to me. I just went to a shop and picked one off a shelf, and it sat on my shelf for years before I even picked it up. But I had an immediate connection once I started working with it. I think because I was already familiar with the language of symbols from being exposed to them at such a young age, and that has enriched my life in so many ways.
I love that. That's such a beautiful connection from, your childhood and the religious piece, because I think we all go through these journeys for a reason, and being able to now tie that back to the symbolism and connecting to that when you were a child and bringing that forward to the tarot is really, really cool. I love that. And so one thing that I also want to touch on with you, because it's something that we've spoken about and will also be, I think, a common kind of thread that goes through a lot of episodes, just based on people I know that are going to be coming and sharing their stories and different spiritual practices and their healing modalities, is this idea of a spiritual closet. And I've heard the term a lot in the last couple of years. It's interesting. I really had thought of this as being you're in a corporate job, whatever that means, just working outside of your home. But really, if you're an entrepreneur, even if you have your own business and you're selling to people or businesses, it certainly applies. But then also I was talking to my sister, who is a mostly stay-at-home mom to her son. And we were talking about how even in that space, if you are meeting other moms, you might not be willing to go to the park and say, hey, do you want me to, show you my tarot deck? Someone might be like, okay, that's like, when you're a kid, it was kind of cool to invite someone to like use the Ouija board or something at a sleepover. Other people might have been like, oh my gosh, no, that's creepy and devilish. So, this concept though of kind of feeling like we all have to hide our spirituality. And it also ties into this concept around embodiment as well and kind of what that looks like. So, I know you and I have had some conversations, but I'd love to just chat for a couple minutes about, why is it so hard to just be ourselves, which in the end, we're all spiritual, divine beings. We all came from the same source. And so why is it so hard for us to feel like we can't be who we are out in the world and wear these masks, I guess, is kind of the easiest way, as you and I have described them, as kind of having our masks.
Yeah, that I think is a question that we are seeking answers to from our entire lives, honestly. And I think it's such a huge reason why when you get to midlife, there's that concept of the midlife crisis. I think it's actually a spiritual crisis because in this day and age, we're so disconnected from purpose and meaning and service, the things that obviously make life worth living. And we're taught and programmed to be focused on other things like making money and climbing a career ladder and being the perfect mother or wife or husband or father or employee or whatever it might be, that we kind of don't even know who we are. So I feel like there's a process of discovery that we go on that takes a really long time to rediscover ourselves. And then we have to place ourselves in the world that only wants to reward you for being a good consumer, a good citizen. And it's really hard to reconcile those things. And I swear all of my teachers, they're like, no one even cares, but we think they do. We think we're going to be judged so hard. We think, and I still feel this way.
We're scared. It's fear. It's that fear. Like you were talking about childhood fear. Like I think we all have this, most of us have some type of fear.
Yeah, like that you're going to be judged. And there's a vulnerability in sharing our deepest belief systems, in sharing our full authenticity. Think about how long it takes when we're in a new relationship with someone to actually just be ourselves and not have that polished mask on. It's like that with our spiritual journey and our spiritual selves, which is really our true selves. So we're so afraid of judgment, I think, especially in the context of the workplace, because appearing professional is so important and it's pretty much standard across most industries. I'm still really struggling with that coming out of the closet. I'm okay with being seen in interviews like this. I'm okay with putting myself out there on social media. I make videos on YouTube about tarot. I have a podcast, yet I still am very limited with what I share with my family, for instance, because I don't want the judgment. In my most recent normie world job, no one had any idea. The only thing you could get was that I had a crystal around my neck, which was the world's biggest piece of black tourmaline. And I don't know, it was just fashion.
Was that like protection?
I know why I needed it now, because I definitely needed that thing to transmute the vibes from that workplace. But I was very sheltered with what I was prepared to share about myself, because I felt so weird, so different, so misunderstood. That I thought it would be easier for me to be someone else at work. And actually, it really destroyed my confidence.
It's exhausting because you're literally, it's like you're different people. It's let me get through my workday, and then it's just like, people coming home and putting on their pajamas or like their comfy clothes and taking off kind of the stiff work clothes that, probably don't feel as good, and just, I can be me and relax. And this is what I really wear, which of course, during the pandemic, we got to see how people really lived and what they wore, or, I still miss those like Zoom, fashionable on top and wearing shorts on the bottom and no one can see. And when people kind of started sharing that, I feel like we let our guard down a bit during that time.
Yeah.
And it felt, I don't know, maybe to me, which was maybe part of this kind of beautiful connection to people were a bit more open because they were looking and desperate for connection. And so people were willing maybe to be a little bit more vulnerable, but I am finding just from working in that corporate world that it feels like the guards are going back up especially here in the US, where we have people mandated to come back to office 4 and 5 days a week, which, most of us didn't think we'd get back to this point ever again. And I think with that comes I can't be maybe as casual or laid back with things. So maybe then, you're not opening up and we're not talking about our families and our lives and, things that we like to do outside of just working. And it kind of makes me sad.
Yeah. Reflecting on this now, I'm thinking about what happens if I was my more interesting self at that job, because the people that I was drawn to were the people who were a little bit alternative. If there was an out, not that this is me, but if there was some out witch in that place, I would have immediately been wanting to be friends with her. And I'm like, you know what? I actually robbed people from having a cool person at work to talk to because I was just so shut down. And that is a shame. I feel bad for me, but I'm also like, if everyone did that, no one would be cool or interesting. Like, how sad is that?
It is. And they're missing out on the chance to connect with you and get to know you and all your gifts and all the things you bring. So it is interesting. And like I said, it's definitely going to be a theme that I talk to. Not that I think there is an answer, because I think we're all searching and trying to figure this out. But I think the more we talk about it, maybe the more we can start cracking open the closet door. And I know for me, this is a big step of putting myself out there, my voice and sharing. And I have to tell you, even in my job, in my corporate world, everyone I've told about this podcast and wanting to do this, they're all like, oh my gosh, I can't wait. Like, you have to share it with me. And I guess if anyone wanted to say something, I wouldn't know it, but it really has been met with genuine enthusiasm and appreciation, because I think people see what I bring to my work, and my lens has really changed over the last couple of years. How I help and coach people has changed because of my spiritual connection and how I see the world. And it's so different. And I think people appreciate that because it's me and they know who I am and they know what I bring and how I'm really passionate about creating community and bringing people together and helping and having all of those values. I mean, there's nothing bad about it, So it's like, if that's spirituality, it's, gosh, everyone needs it. Everyone needs a dose of it. So I'm excited to kind of hear what other people share with us as they have either struggled or maybe, have kind of summited that mountain and said, here I am, and I'm me, and I'm free, and I'm out there, and I have this, great role in the world and a great job I love, and I'm able to be me. And so I'm excited to learn from others too.
Yeah, I'm so excited to hear the different guests you have in store for the podcast coming up, because I feel like maybe this is shifting now, and I hope it is, but there was this idea when we were going through that time during the pandemic and everyone was having these like full-blown awakenings, that the only option to live authentically and come out of that closet was to quit your normie job and go and become some spiritual coach and do ayahuasca trips in Peru and go be a yoga teacher in Bali or whatever it is. And that's, I mean, in many ways, that's what I've done throughout most of my career, on and off. I've either worked for myself or been a consultant, and it's easy to be myself when I'm not in that formal workplace structure, when I'm not showing up to be with people every day. And at first it feels like freedom, but after a while, it's a bit of a cop-out, actually. I think there's much more courage, much more growth, much more expansion to actually be able to live your truth in those settings. And I think that's where we're coming back to, that you don't need to quit your job and have some new career in a spiritual industry, because firstly, I don't think there's such a thing, but second, we actually need more people in the real world doing real world things, connecting with each other at a deeper level and sharing more authentically with more purpose and more meaning. And that's what I'm so excited to hear from so many of your guests who are coming from perhaps more of a professional setting in their work life and either have other things they do on the side or are finding ways to weave both together so that there's more purpose and meaning and service in what they do and who they connect with in the corporate world. So I'm interested to know from you, Heather, because it's such an important and powerful theme for this podcast. And I know you're going to be talking about this topic a lot with future guests around this concept of coming out of the closet and what it is to feel confident in just being your full self, your full true self in that workplace setting, corporate or otherwise. And I know that you just mentioned that it's something that as you've opened yourself more authentically to the people that you're working with and in your job, that you're actually getting this incredible feedback and loving, warm reception back where people are thanking you because it's so meaningful. So I'd love to know from you what that experience has been like for you and where you might still feel challenged about being your fully fledged spiritual self in your job.
If I'm being honest, I would not say I'm fully out of the closet. I think I pick and choose. I wouldn't even say carefully, but I'm very mindful and intentional with my language. And I think I pretty quickly can pick up if someone has similar beliefs just by how they're speaking. There's just certain things you hear and it's like, oh, wait, I think I can maybe drop this little nugget in here that's going to be more maybe on the spiritual side versus kind of traditional answer that you might give in the work that I do, and see how it's received. And it can be so beautiful how it unravels really quickly in a good way, where it just unwinds this kind of, it's almost like a loosening. I feel like that's what can happen when you are more authentic and you can share from a place that is more coming from your heart. And so I've definitely found that people have been, when I have that opportunity, I see the door cracked open a little bit. It deepens the relationship so quickly because it certainly gives other people permission to be who they are and to be able to share or ask questions. And I can't tell you how many times people will not only have taught me things, but have asked me for, oh my gosh, where'd you learn about this? Or what's your favorite book? Or shared a modality, or I know that something's going on with someone and I've, sent a follow-up and said, hey, if you're interested, I know someone who might be helpful in this space. So, check out their website or reach out and just exchange a note or something like that. So I was at a work conference a couple of months ago with my company, with my colleagues and peers. And I think for me, while it wasn't probably as obvious, I don't wear robes or anything, but I might.
We don't have a uniform.
Well, yeah, we don't have a uniform, but I do wear like a lot of crystal bracelets, and like my jewelry might be a little bit hippie-ish or whatever. And so while I might not be outwardly talking about spiritual things, although I did have a couple of conversations as I was connecting one-on-one with peers outside of our meetings, but it's like this presence I think that I have of being present and kind and listening without judgment and sharing a perspective. And I had quite a few people who sent me notes after just saying, oh my gosh, it was so great to see you. You're such a bright light and those kinds of things. And I feel like that's something that didn't happen to me before. And I think it just encourages me more that being out in the world, as you were saying, and being able to live my truth, which that might just be being kinder and more loving to everybody, no matter what. And I think it can really change the dynamic in a conversation or a meeting that you're having when you give people grace. And, if someone's having a bad day, you don't feed into it. I think there's such little nuanced ways that I show up differently now in my work day to day and in my interactions. And like I said, if someone cracks that door, and I think we can have like a even more meaningful conversation that's going to go deeper than kind of the superficial, whatever we'd be talking about, even though the work I do is pretty personal already. So I think it does probably invite more deeper conversations. I'm dealing with people who are going through significant life transitions. So that in and of itself is already personal, but this is just kind of taking it to another level. And I think the biggest thing I have found is that I'm able to, I think because of what I share, I give people a lot of hope, because I just know there's so much goodness in the world, especially right now, as we're all kind of struggling to, I think, sometimes find the good in the everyday. I think having that perspective that there's so much abundance, there's so much to be grateful for, despite all of the other stuff that's going on around us. And how can you just kind of create your own world for yourself where you're taking care of yourself? And at some point that's going to spider out to other people. It really is going to I guess, be projected outward, and it will change everything. It'll change what you magnetize to you. It'll change how you see the world. It'll change how you speak to people, how you speak to yourself. So I guess for me, I'm still I'm still learning. I'm still kind of like cracking the door open. This is definitely a big crack too, putting myself out there in this podcast and in this space. But I think for me, I'm to the point that honestly, I know what's meant for me will come. And I think if for some reason I don't resonate with other people, we're probably not meant to work together or be necessarily in community in this moment together. And that's okay, because I don't have to be for everyone and everyone doesn't have to be for me. And so I believe that whatever's meant for me will come my way. And I want to keep magnetizing people who are on the same kind of frequency as me. So yeah.
That is so beautiful. And just the idea of you carrying that frequency and letting that transmit through your actions and through your words, and just what your focus is when you're working with someone to make sure that the role you're playing is uplifting them and motivating them and empowering them and all of those beautiful positive things is really wonderful.
Yeah. And that's actually a beautiful segment into the second part of the topic around embodiment. I hear this term a lot, and one of my best teachers who I've never met other than through a Zoom, Rebecca Campbell. I love her. She's been just an amazing teacher to me, but she talks a lot about embodiment and what that means. And to me, that's how can we bring the spiritual into our everyday? And that doesn't mean that you have to necessarily meditate every day. It's great if you do. You're going to see a lot of health benefits, but that might not be for everybody. But bringing the spiritual in could be, for me, I know I have a couple of daily practices that I see as kind of embodiment. I do a gratitude practice as soon as I wake up in the morning. I clear my energy just quickly to kind of wipe off anything from the day before. I do affirmations, which has become, from a personal growth perspective and the personal growth movement, which I was a big part of for years, doing affirmations, having stickies all over your mirrors and in your car, and all of those I see as spiritual practices. They all bring us back to self. Even being outside in nature, listening to nature, grounding, physically grounding, putting our feet on the earth, having solar water, just these little things that all of that to me is embodying spirituality and who we are. It's nothing outside of ourselves that we have to buy anything or go somewhere to do. It's just something that we can do no matter where we are in any setting. And so I'm curious, as we kind of wrap up, what that means for you in terms of embodiment.
Yeah. Embodiment takes place on so many levels for me. And I think there's a beautiful part of embodiment that happens through ritual that you've talked about. So all those mini rituals we have that help us feel connected and aligned throughout our day are really important. But there's other layers of embodiment as well, that because sometimes, like you said, we don't have access. A lot of people think it's all about buying the products that help us do these things, or constantly being signed up to courses and constantly learning. But the time we take to actually integrate what we learn and live it. So for me, embodiment is so much about walking the walk, not just talking the talk. And that shows up in every interaction we have with every person every day. That is what we spend our time thinking about and talking about, what we're consuming. There's also that physical level of embodiment. So having an awareness of what things feel like in the body, and our need to move and our need to have our feet on the earth and feel the wind on our face and all of these things, the sun on our bodies. Embodiment can be explained in so many ways. But for me, it really comes down to walking the walk, which is our biggest challenge. So if we feel like we're on a path of spiritual awakening and we describe ourselves as spiritual people, how are we living that? And the easy bits are the rituals. The hard bits are how are we living that when we interact with people, when we're impatient or when we're frustrated or tired? How are we embodying that when we're at work, working on something we're finding really boring, but it's an important part of our job? All of those things, when we're frustrated by our partner and really want to lash out or explode.
Or someone cuts us off in traffic and you see someone lose their mind, and Louise Hay would have you say that you would send them on their way, you would send them a blessing, you would love them, you would do all those things. It's really hard to do.
Yeah.
But with practice, you can, and you do feel better.
It's true. Anger really hurts ourselves, but we also have this need to release pressure sometimes as humans. And when that happens, how do we respond to ourselves about that? How much guilt do we carry? Can we forgive ourselves? Can we have acceptance? There's just so many levels to the embodiment that it's not just about being peace and love all the time. We're humans and life happens, and it's how are we responding to those challenges? How are we growing from them? What lessons are we taking? And I also love all the practices, but I know on my journey, it goes up and down. Sometimes I'm fully committed and I spend 2 hours a day doing meditations and journaling and tarot pulls and all sorts of stuff. And then sometimes I'm in phases of absolute exhaustion where just getting out of bed is an achievement for the day. And in those moments, what grace do we have with ourselves? Where can we find service that we can be in of that helps others? Like, there's so much to it. So I think embodiment's such a fantastic theme that you'll be unpacking with other guests as well, because it's not just doing yoga and it's not just grounding, although they're fantastic and so helpful. I love those practices, but there's more to it. And the other thing I want to say is, like, I've learned some really amazing things from my teachers in Peru. So I have spent time doing all the courses and stuff like that. And I've learned so many amazing things from shamanic teachers about older ways of being embodied, because everything's embodied for Indigenous cultures. It's amazing. And we have so much to learn from them. Yeah, but absolutely. One lesson was that every moment is a prayer, that, you know, you can take your time and do the praying and then you go off and live your life. But if you treat every moment in your life as a prayer, then that's a completely different thing. And I think about, say, a monk in a cave. You know, it's an incredible thing to have people around the world holding the frequency of deep, intense, even if we don't want to think about it as religious prayer, but say devotion to improving the world for everyone here, that they are sitting in meditation, that they are sitting in prayer for hours, days, months, you know, even at a time in these caves, perhaps completely isolated, because that's what it takes. But imagine having that person, once they're done with that, out in the world, in the community, helping people. Like, that's where that presence and that energy is actually needed. So, yeah, like thinking about the monk in the cave is very useful. But when the monk comes out of the cave and actually brings that presence out into the world with other people, that's even more useful, I think. And that's how I like to see embodiment.
Wow. Yeah, that's so beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
You're so welcome.
Okay, so we're going to wrap up, because I know we want to try and keep these episodes right around between 40 and 60 minutes. Will really depend on the topic and how far we go. But one thing I would love for you to leave the listeners with, what's, I guess, one of your favorite daily practices that you do that you would like to share? Maybe right now, because I know you said things, you know, I think we all change. So there's definitely different practices, but is there something that anchors you, you know, in, or grounds you, or just something that you feel is really important to your everyday?
Yeah. I'm going to share two, because I'm going to be totally upfront. I'm not in a deeply spiritual phase at the moment where I'm doing lots of practices and rituals. But there is one that when I am working, when I'm making my energy medicines, when I am going into readings with people, that I always make sure I do, which is a smoke cleansing. So that can be quite a complex ritual if you want it to be, but even just if things feel off in your space, using something to clear the space can be really helpful. And it can be burning some incense or some Palo Santo or something like that, and just allowing the smoke and speaking what you want cleared, you know, asking for your guides to help you to clear the space can be really powerful, and allowing the smoke to travel. But even just clapping, speaking your intention to clear is enough. You don't have to use tools. You don't have to buy anything. We have the power within us to create the energetic change that we're seeking, just with our bodies, with our voices.
So true.
So that's one that I'd say, if ever you're feeling a bit off your center, just clearing the space around you, either with smoke or with sound from yourself, is really powerful. But again, it's not something I'm doing every single day. I'm doing it when I'm called to do it. The main thing in this downtime for me, the dip of not having all these practices, is actually my talk with myself. This is definitely something that I'm trying to honor every single day. And if I catch myself going into thoughts that are negative about me, I will tell myself no. I'll catch myself and I'll say, no, we're not thinking that. We're not talking that way today.
Love that.
Anyone can do that anytime.
Yeah.
It takes practice, but it's really helpful because it's one way we can stop the mind spiraling into a more negative aspect about someone else or ourselves. So that is something that I practice as often as I possibly can.
I love that. That's great. And yeah, I think, I actually caught myself today. I've been pretty good about how I talk to myself. And when I look in the mirror and I'm going through some health things and recovering right now and trying to give myself a lot of grace. And I saw a photo of myself from yesterday. And then I was looking in the mirror today and I almost went down a rabbit hole. And then I just was able to stop myself and say, no, you're beautiful. I love you. And that has taken so much practice, but it feels so good when you don't feed into, all these things that we hear about how we should be, or, all the things, the not enoughness. And and it's funny because all the things I listed, from an embodiment perspective or from a practice perspective, didn't really think about that, but it is something that I try to do as well. And I love that you shared that because I think it's so incredibly powerful. Imagine if all of us, everyone listening, if every day you just tried to catch the negative thoughts and try and turn it into something positive, or even just say, no, I'm not going to bring that into my space. I'm not going to carry that thought. So I'm going to release that and let it go.
Yeah. And I think
so much
when we're in those phases of not being deep in our practices that help us feel grounded and stable and elevated, we are more prone to being in a negative thought space. I remember having to be told that by someone else, that you can actually tell yourself, no, I'm not thinking this, and you can focus on not thinking about it. So yeah, I give you all permission to do that as often as you need to. It's a very powerful practice. Heather, I want to ask you, because I don't know if you'll be in the position with many people asking you to answer that question. You listed off a bunch of practices, but what's your most empowering, grounding practice at the moment?
Yeah. So for me, it's definitely my gratitude practice. I never go through a day without gratitude. And what it does is it really sets me up for the rest of the day to find gratitude in everything. And it's something that I share with people all the time. I actually think I was on a work call today and I told the person to think of a couple things they're grateful for. And so I just have really tripled down on having a gratitude practice every day. It's a tarot journal. I don't think I ever shared it or took a picture. I should show you, but I have this beautiful tarot journal that my sister got me. And in it has a full gratitude section that you fill out every day. And I feel like my day's not complete if I haven't done it. There's a place there for affirmation. There's gratitude. There's things that you can list that you're proud of. And I used to put stuff for my kids. I'd put, oh, I'm so proud that, my son did this, or my kids didn't fight today, so I'm so proud of them, or whatever. Now I primarily try to focus on myself because it's my practice and I want to kind of share those moments with myself because I think I give so much of that to everyone else. And I'm just like most people, I'm not necessarily last, but close to that. So literally writing something like I'm proud of myself for, like last night, I got really frustrated with my son and I walked out and I took some breaths and I came back in and apologized and did, what I would call repair. And I was really proud of myself because, not that long ago, I would have just gone in my room and been frustrated and huffing and puffing and aggravated. And then I would have gone back in there when he was asleep and felt guilty and sad and beating myself up. And he wouldn't be awake to be able to give me a hug and tell me it was okay. And so I was like, I'm not going to do that. And so for me, that acknowledgement of, in that little section of my journal to write, I'm proud of you repairing last night, getting through your frustration and not holding on to that as I went to sleep was just, it just changed everything. Like it changed my dynamic last night within the course of, 2 minutes. And so that practice for me has had, it just ripples out so much into my life of how I see gratitude everywhere, how there's always something to be grateful for. I'm acknowledging, things that I'm proud of. And I try to do it in the morning try to start my day with it, but once in a while, something might go awry and it doesn't happen. But most of the time I will still open up a note on my phone within the first hour or two if I can't write it down. And the physical act of putting it down and looking at it and reading it just does something for me. It's like it solidifies it out in the universe. So something I don't like to start my day without. Could I? Sure. But it just sets me up, I think, for whatever success I'm going to have that day and whatever that means for me. So
that's so powerful. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah. Thank you for asking me. All right. Well, this has been so fun. I'm really excited to have you as part of so many of these conversations as we're bringing people into the mix, but also you can see why she's my spiritual sidekick, because she's definitely holding back in terms of, we want to make sure that this is accessible in terms of things we're talking about, but we will go a little deeper and have more time to explain different concepts. But she's so knowledgeable, and I'm just so grateful that you're doing this with me. So thank you. And we can't wait to bring you our next episode. So until then, I hope everyone is good to others and good to yourself, because that's what life's about. So
absolutely.
We love you.